Welcome to Tea and Teaching, the educational podcast you can listen to with a cup of tea. My name's Arthur Moore, and with me, as always, it's Mike Carrawell. Hi, Mike. How are you today?
I'm brilliant, Arthur. How are you?
Yeah, I'm delightful, buddy. I'm really excited for our third part in our little mini series on Rosenshine. Are you ready?
Yeah, so we've covered in episode 1 what is Rosenshine principles of instruction. Episode 2, we talked about how you can introduce it to your whole school or your department. And now we're joined by Claire again. We're going to start talking about what we can do in our classrooms to implement this really, really effectively. So I'm excited.
Yeah, Claire, welcome back to Tea and Teaching. How are you?
Hello, yeah, I'm good, thank you.
And you wrote a book called Rosenshine, the Workbook. So I kind of feel this is going to be like your absolute area of expertise, and me and Mike can just sit back, have a cup of tea, and kind of listen to you. So we'll talk about the classroom today. I've all bought into the Rosenshine. I've bought into my school, my department, which we spoke to last time. My head of department absolutely nailed it. I'm good to go. I'm good to go. What should I, as a teacher in my classroom, Claire, where should I start?
Yeah, so that's really going to depend on each teacher. And I think what I'd really encourage people to do is a bit of a reflection or an analysis, an evaluation on what your teaching practice currently looks like. And you can do that, I don't know, you could reflect on your teaching from across the day or the week, or even just the last lesson you taught. You know, you need something that's going to be your focus. And I think just get really, really curious about where you've perhaps exhibited some of the principles and how well you think you did that. And depending on how experienced you are, you know, whether you have significant expertise or not, that might be something you need to do with somebody else, because that can be quite hard if you're not really, really familiar with kind of analysing and evaluating classroom practice. You might want to do that with a partner, a trusted peer, your head of department, you know, someone. But that's where I'd begin, because if you're really serious about developing your practice, you've got to choose, you know, the area that you want to begin with. You can't just say, I'm going to improve everything, and every lesson I'm going to try and get in the 10 principles. You know, it just doesn't work like that. There'll be lessons where you're really focusing on perhaps one or two things in particular, and others where you maybe need to look at something else. Really depends where you're at in the curriculum. So I do that work first in terms of really thinking about what it is you need, but also what it is that your children need, and, you know, the pupils that you teach, what are their gaps, what are their areas of need, and how can you develop your teaching to help, you know, fill that gap and help kind of move them on and help them progress. So I begin there. And then I think the kind of two areas that I think, are just so essential for the classroom, I'd be looking at modelling, and I'd also be looking at questioning. So they're the two things that I'd really then start looking at and considering.
I think we can all kind of, as educators, those two things are so important to everything we do. I know we've done pods, Mike, on kind of examples, and we've done quite a few pods on kind of on questioning. Why do you think, Mike, like it's those two things that always kind of stand out as like great places to start when we're kind of developing our own teaching at any level, I think?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Claire. Modelling wise, I think because knowledge always precedes skills. So if we cannot impart that knowledge upon the students, when we then ask them to apply it into a concept or a context, they're going to apply it with misconceptions and they're going to apply it incorrectly. And it's harder to correct a misconception than it is just to teach it really well the first time through. So I think getting that modelling correct in the first place helps students kind of consolidate that understanding and gives them that really clear schema moving forward to then apply it into the contexts we want them to do. And then I think in terms of asking questions, that's about their understanding any misconceptions that are coming. So it's you're checking that the student's understanding is where you want it to be. And we all know the best teachers in any classroom are the ones that are able to adapt and respond to the feedback they get from the students. The worst lessons I ever see are someone asks a question, picks one kid, they give them the right answer, they go, brilliant, all 30 of you understand this, let's move on. And there's 26 other students sat there going, I don't know this, you just picked one of 5 who do. I think that's terrible maths, 1 of 4. Yeah, I think those 2 principles, I wholeheartedly agree with Claire. If you're going to get 2 things right, get those 2 things, and everything else will then become easier.
Claire, once again, you're nodding at what Mike is saying, which is
I'm
a
petrified
worrying
that
theme.
Claire's going to shake her head. I'm really scared of that moment.
I'm not getting many nods, but Mike, you must be nailing it. It must be doing something right.
I
Claire,
usually
do you
nod to
agree with
show
Mike?
I'm listening, so
Oh, not this,
don't
right?
read
We're just
too much
listening.
into it.
Yeah, that was wrong. That was wrong. No.
No, I do agree, and I think you've also got to, if you're going to do great modelling and we're going to ask great, good questions and questions that really help you to understand what your students understand. I guess the thing that the umbrella that sits over all of that is really knowing your subject, because I don't feel like, and this doesn't necessarily kind of, it's not explicit in Rosenshine's principles, but I think that you can't demonstrate effective teaching without knowing your subject. I see it as kind of an umbrella that sits over everything, that you've got to have that subject knowledge. And I think what some of the questions that I've posed in the workbook do, and so the workbook isn't so much, something you'd sit down and read. You'd watch Tom's video and it tells you when to pause, gives you questions, you then kind of reflect and think about things, and then you resume the video. And what some of the questions do, and I'm just looking here now at the example in the section on modelling, they get you to think about the principles from that kind of curriculum perspective. So there's questions here that say things like, it is important to use more than one worked example. Why is this? And can you identify any topics that you teach in which you could make better use of worked examples? So the workbook kind of works to help you to understand the principles and the significance of kind of then parts of them like worked examples, but then to start thinking about your practice and your curriculum in action, and really thinking about, okay, well, can I make better use of worked examples somewhere? Where is that in the curriculum? And then, the question that follows that is, why is it important that a teacher discusses the underlying principles of what they have done during or after a worked example? So then getting you to think about not just understanding the principle and elements of it, not just what that looks like in terms of enacting the curriculum, but then, what does that look like in terms of how I'm supporting students' learning? And so I think when we talk about being really forensic, and I'm always talking to teachers about being intentional with their practice and their development, that's what I mean. I look at those layers and really consider your, those things. And I don't think that you can necessarily do that if you don't also have that subject knowledge. So I would really as well recommend that if you're kind of listening and thinking maybe you're teaching out of subject, or maybe, like me, I'm currently teaching Much Ado About Nothing. I've never taught it before. Maybe you're in that position and you're having to focus on other things. I'd really look at subject knowledge first, and then consider how you're going to develop in terms of, modelling or questioning and so on.
It reminds me, Claire, when I moved to teach in Thailand, started teaching the IB, I was teaching maths. that I had not just not talked for, I had never done. I had no idea, like, even do it. So I completely agree. There's no way I could have modelled a question about it, because I had to go back and I had literally my workbook where we've done every single question in a worked example for my students. So when they came to me, I could be like, right, I know how to, I'm confident with this question. And I think you're right, like models example, as a maths teacher, obviously I'm biased. I love a worked example, I love modelling them. But I think you can do so much from a good bit of modelling and worked example. You can then scaffold your approaches going forward. You can assess the learning. You can ask questions. And like within that modelled example, I was wondering if you and Mike had kind of any top tips for like what makes a good model, because we've said do a good modelled example. What makes a good model example in your classroom?
Yeah. Did you want to take this one, Mike, or shall I? Once
Yeah,
I
Mike,
start,
kick
I
off.
might
You're
not
out
stop.
in the field
Oh,
or doing sports science, whatever you want.
feel like I'm on an interview. I was just going to jump in there and said it was wonderful watching you learn long division, Arthur, and you not looked back since then.
It was, yeah, it was some hard maths. It was some hard maths.
But for me, a work model is breaking it down step by step and being really, really explicit about the order of those steps and why you're doing what you're doing when you're doing it. Maybe a misconception that modeling is I am going to stand at the front and lecture you and show you exactly how to do this. There needs to be a level of checking for understanding as you go, because you have to understand that the pace you're working at works for the students of the class. You can't just run off and be 8 steps down the way where they're still on step 3, because again, it's going to create those misconceptions. And then finally, the thing for me is, especially when you've modeled something and you know that there is a high level of understanding, is then model it in a slightly different context. So I'm going to give a maths example here, Arthur, is if you're looking at the way of expanding brackets, you're not going to do your model in the same way and then give them questions where that's challenge them in a slightly different way. You're going to show them how to do that in one problem and how it might look slightly different in another problem, still following the same principles. So that for me is, it's break it down step by step, check for understanding, but also then model it how it might look in different kind of aspects within your subject. Am I right, Claire? Or have I missed things? I'm sure I have.
No, I agree with you. And I think, yeah, that point about you've got to, we're trying to teach children to be flexible with their knowledge and to be able to apply it to different contexts. And, you know, as Mike said, question isn't always going to look the same, or how they use that knowledge isn't always going to be the same. So we absolutely need to be kind of empowering them to use their knowledge flexibly, and that's where modelling is so useful. I think probably just what I'd add to that is, I mean, if you are teaching without a visualizer at the moment, I'd be going to your head teacher and asking them to get you one, because a visualizer for me was something that, I mean, I've been using one for years now, just revolutionized how I could model in the classroom. If, you know, live modeling is, I guess, for me, my go-to form of modeling. You ordinarily would do everything live in the moment, really supporting students' metacognition with my narration of what I'm doing and why. Maybe you'll move that into some I, we, you modelling. So, you know, once you've shown them how to do something, you bring them in. As Mike said, you use all your repertoire of questioning to check for understanding. Okay, what did I do first? What should I do next? Are we really sure that that's the vocabulary we want to use? You know, let's think about our terminology and that kind of thing, and then you can hand over to them for the final part, for the U, where they can be independent. So I think live modelling and use of the visualizer just really lends itself to that. I know, and I really appreciate that for some people, especially if you're perhaps starting out or if you're teaching out of subject, live modelling can feel incredibly daunting, and you might not have had time, you know, I do it there in the moment, and I will have thought about it in advance, but I don't write anything down. But I know that that's not realistic for some people, and some people say, you know, I'm just not ready to live model yet, even if I've got it there, what I'm going to do. And so I guess what I say to that is, look, if you're going to provide a pre-prepared model, you have to do something generative with it. It can't just be a case that you read it together, or you look at, you know, the working out together and then assume that everybody knows what it is they're looking at. And I think one top tip for that is to have two models, because it's so much more effective for students to look at why something is a really good example if they've got something not quite so good to compare it to. When you look at something in isolation, it's so much harder to work out why that is good. When you've got that point of comparison, you can really start to pick apart, okay, well, what does this one do that this one doesn't? And that's where you can kind of really encourage students to think a bit harder. So that's my advice for people who are kind of thinking, look, live modelling is all well and good, but I'm just not there yet. Fine. Be really generative then with your kind of pre-prepared models and have them side by side, or make sure that you've set up, you know, some kind of framework or success criteria for students to really explore why that model is an example of excellence, and that you're really, really utilising your questioning to support that checking for understanding. Because, you know, we've talked in previous episodes about how we need to think about the different levels that our teachers are at, and I think we have to recognise that as well when we're talking about this kind of thing. Rather, you know, I don't think we can just assume that everyone's quite happy to just go under a visualizer and write away, because, yeah, you know, people are at different places with that.
One thing I found really useful in my early years of teaching, someone gave me this advice, some teacher, was when I was like struggling with that modelling idea and having to do that as well, behaviour management, all the other stuff that's going on in the classroom, was I just used to record myself on the visualizer answering a problem, have up on the board, but then I would narrate it live. And that allowed me to kind of practice my written modelling by myself without that pressure, but I could also practice my narration live. And as you get to practice it, you can feed off the room. I can see, what, as I was saying this sentence, I've lost those students there. Why have I lost them? And you can adapt generation. So that's a nice way to kind of scaffold yourself almost into that modelling approach of what is the bit you find difficult about modelling and how can you make that bit easier so you can focus on that. So the example I gave, I found the narration difficult, so I will give myself more cognitive space to focus on that. And I think that worked really well. Mike, imagine in your subject, like when you're kind of doing practical PE, there's a lot of modelling. Like that's a huge part of what you do. And I'm wondering, from your background, when you get new PE teachers who are normally, let's say, better at sport than people who are in kind of the PE classroom, like how you get them to practice modelling. I remember you gave me an example of how you train as a teacher, and I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, the example I always give when it's about modelling is do a cartwheel. If you're not from a gymnastics background, model a very good cartwheel to a group of students and say, this is what I want your cartwheel to look like. And narrate your way through it. It's almost impossible to narrate your way through that skill and show them step by step. So that's when you then need to start thinking about, how can I use my resources here? Do I have a TV screen, a projector, something where I can show them somebody doing the skill, slow it down and narrate it, like you said thereafter, talk it through step by step? Do I have a student in the class who I can physically support through it and do some manual guidance and say, at this stage, that's happening, this is happening, do it like that? Even within your own subject, you're going to feel more confident modeling some things than others. You know, even if it's your subject. And I think it's about understanding your own limitations as a teacher, working on them, but also finding ways around that that's not going to impact student understanding. My cartwheel's all right now. I'm getting less flexible these days, so they're not great. But when I first started teaching, I couldn't do one. I had to go and teach myself how to do a cartwheel, just to be able to model it once a year, maybe to my year sevens.
I would pay good money to watch Mike Carroll do a cartwheel.
Oh, accepted. This is going to be a great money earner. I'll see you on Saturday.
Well, we're going camping this weekend. It's literally, you can teach Jasper how to cartwheel. I'm all over this. Hey, do you do many cartwheels in your teaching lessons, or?
Absolutely not. No, we do not. And I don't like children to leave their seats either. So there's no real opportunity for cartwheels to be happening. I like order and silence.
So just to kind of bring it full circle, Claire, we talked about those two strategies in terms of modeling and questioning, and we talked about the fact that there should be an element of question within that modeling phase as well. Can you briefly run through to us what you believe effective questioning looks like? So if I'm a teacher listening to this, I want to go into my class tomorrow and I want to be really, really good at questioning. What do Rosenshine's principles of instruction say I should be doing to make that as effective as possible?
So Rosenshine talks about asking lots of questions. So says that the most effective teachers ask lots of questions. I would also think about, you want to know what you are asking, why you're asking it, and then what are you actually going to do with the responses that you get. And I think often what can happen, and I think this, certainly happens at the start of people's teaching careers, is that you focus on the questioning as in asking the questions, and you don't necessarily look at questioning as this kind of whole concept, and that there's more than just the questions. You've got to do something with the answers that you get and be responsive to those. If you're someone thinking, right, I want to get into the classroom tomorrow, I want to improve my questioning, I just spend a little bit of time thinking about what answers am I expecting, what am I going to do with those answers, and what am I going to do if I get answers that aren't what I'm expecting. How am I really going to utilize those responses that are not quite right? And I think they're just as useful as correct answers. When someone gets it wrong, I think that's great, because there you've got such an opportunity to kind of pause and really check, is it just this person or is it others? And then the other thing I would encourage people to think about, and I'm not sure people think about it enough, is how you are selecting. Let's say you're doing, cold call questioning, and you're not doing something like mini whiteboards where you can see the answers for the whole class. Let's say that you are selecting students. I would really encourage you to think about your sample and who the children you pick are representative of in terms of a group, and making sure that you're selecting children who represent others that are similar to them in the room. Because if you ask, 3 children a question each, and their responses are typically indicative of each other, then you're really getting a very small data set from the questioning that you're doing. Whereas if you start thinking about questioning and how many you're questioning and who you're questioning as your sample, and you want to sample kind of, the wide range that you've got in the room, there's no real science to it. You're never going to get an exact kind of measure of the understanding of every single person from questioning a few people, but you will get a sense if you think about who it is and who else they represent in the room. You will get a more of a sense of kind of, okay, well, if Tom understands that, then typically so does Kelly and Sharon. I don't know, I've picked names from the 80s, they've really gone back in time.
But you're teaching the whole Osborne family.
I didn't realise I was getting through the Osborne family. But, Ozzy's not in the class, by the way.
Of course he isn't.
He got sent out long ago. But yeah, just I think really take some time to think about not just thinking, you know, oh, who am I going to ask? Well, that person because they were looking out the window, but really considering that sample and that idea of representation.
And I love what you were speaking about as well, Claire, of like planning your response to responses. I think that's, if I reflect upon kind of my journey as a teacher, that's what you practice first, asking good questions, and then you start to go off their responses. And then as you get more experience, you start to anticipate the responses, and you know what your follow-up is going to be before you've kind of asked your initial question. And those kind of then you start bouncing. And that's when you really start to feel the power of questioning. And like we spoke about this before on the pod mic, and we're going to do some series specials on questioning as well, of how important it is in kind of, you spoke about the toolkit. Like, I think questioning is right up there with the hammer. It's one of the first things you should be getting out, because it's so important to what we do. Is it like that? Is that based on your kind of reflections, Mike, the importance of questioning?
Yeah, we did if you remember, Arthur, we went to a conference where we saw Mr. Barton talk about cold calling, and totally changed the way I use cold calling to make it a whole class conversation, not just me interrogating one student, but actually the way he brought others into that conversation. And it is the most skilled example of cold calling I've seen, and it's something I keep trying to implement in my lessons, because it's engaging everyone in that questioning, so you can engage, or you can judge what everyone understands, but also challenge them to be thinking about what they've learned as well. Absolutely so important to question correctly. Claire, it's been a real privilege to have you for a whole series of podcast episodes. You might now be our most visited guest to the podcast for these 3 episodes.
Oh, that's an honour.
Our listeners are listening to this and they want to find out more about you and more about the workbook, where can they go?
So you can find me on, I was going to say Twitter, but I think I have to say X now. You can find me on X at CSarGG. You can buy the book on Amazon or through the John Catt Bookshop. And if you are interested in a bit more on Rosenshine's principles, I've got a couple of webinars on the National College. Maybe your school has membership, maybe they'll sign up, maybe they'll purchase some viewing for you, but you can have a look there. And I kind of, in those webinars, really get into some of the detail and really practical suggestions as to what you can do in the classroom.
Yeah, I cannot recommend that book highly enough. I think it's something, it's a great book to have, kind of whether it's on your staff CPD bookshelf or kind of on your own. So yeah, what a pleasure it's been to have you on multiple pods, Claire. We've really appreciated it.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me on. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much. Listeners, let us know what you think about this mini series we've had. You can find us on Twitter at @TNTeaching or any other socials. Please tag us in. And we'll be back next time with another mini series. Mike, what a pleasure as always it's been to spend some time with you.
Thank you. You too, Arthur, and thank you once again to Claire.
Thank you.